Picture this. You're sitting in your living room, working from home.
Right.
Your dog is asleep at your feet. You've got a fresh cup of coffee, and you are logged into your company's secure network.
Sounds like a pretty standard Tuesday, honestly.
Exactly. So you highlight a string of text on your remote desktop. You hit Control-C to copy it, and then you just minimize the window to paste it into a sticky note on your personal laptop. Boom.
Yeah, that's where the nightmare starts.
Right. In that single mindless keystroke, you might have just triggered a massive compliance failure, like a failure that could cost your organization a Department of Defense contract or even, violate federal law.
And the fallout from something that simple is entirely real. I mean, people tend to picture cybersecurity failures as hackers in dark hoodies executing complex code injections.
Like in the movies.
Exactly, like in the movies. But so often, it's just a remote worker trying to be efficient. The tension here is immense. We demand the absolute convenience of modern remote work, right?
Yeah, of course. Nobody wants to be chained to a desk.
But that convenience is crashing headfirst into the rigid, uncompromising demands of national security and law enforcement.
Which is exactly what we're getting into today. Welcome to the Deep Dive. Today, we are demystifying the invisible digital boundaries that dictate how sensitive government data is protected.
It's a really complex landscape.
It really is. We are exploring the critical endpoint boundary question. Basically, trying to figure out whether that physical laptop sitting on your kitchen table falls inside or outside the dreaded compliance audit zone.
Specifically when you're dealing with defense data, that's CMMC, or criminal justice data, which is CJIS.
Right. And for anyone listening who navigates remote work or IT architecture, or if you're just curious about how the highest levels of government secure their data, we have a stack of research here on secure enclaves, Microsoft GCC-High, and Azure Government.
And it is dense material.
Oh, it's incredibly dense. Honestly, reading through these compliance manuals, it feels like trying to solve a high-stakes puzzle where the rules just, keep shifting.
Well, they feel like they're shifting because the agencies involved fundamentally disagree on what the word access actually means.
Wait, really? They can't even agree on what access is.
No, not at all. Before you can even begin to secure a remote worker's laptop, you have to understand the underlying philosophy of the data you're protecting. The DoD relies on the CMMC framework, while the FBI relies on the CJIS framework, and their approaches are just miles apart.
Okay, let's unpack this, starting with the DoD and CMMC. Looking at the sources here, it looks like their entire approach revolves around tracking the physical flow of data.
Yes. Specifically what they call CUI, or Controlled Unclassified Information.
Right, CUI. And the DoD actually defines 5 distinct asset categories for any organization handling this data. I'm looking at the list. You have your CUI assets, which are the systems actually processing the data.
Correct.
Then there are security protection assets, or SPAs, contractor risk managed assets, specialized assets, and finally, out-of-scope assets. My question is, why carve a network up into so many different buckets?
Because applying the full weight of DoD security controls to every single device in a company is financially disastrous.
Like it would just bankrupt them.
Absolutely. The overarching standard here is NIST 800-171, which mandates 110 very specific, very rigorous security controls.
What kind of controls are we talking about?
We are talking about strict, complex password policies, heavily encrypted hard drives, multi-factor authentication, continuous monitoring of logs.
Oh, wow. Okay.
Right. So if an organization has to apply all 110 controls to, say, the marketing department's iPads just because the engineering department is building tank parts.
The business couldn't afford it.
Exactly. So CMMC is fundamentally about drawing boundaries. The DoD asks, does the CUI process, store, or transmit through this specific device?
And if the answer is no.
Then you classify it as out of scope, and you save yourself a massive audit headache.
Okay, I like to think of this visually. So under CMMC, they're essentially tracking the actual water. The data is the water.
That's a great way to put it.
Right. If the water doesn't physically touch your device, you're dry, you're out of scope. But then I look at the FBI's policy CJIS, which governs criminal justice information, and the rules seem to completely change.
They do. They flip entirely.
Yeah. The FBI doesn't seem to care about where the data physically lands. They care about who is looking at it.
Under CJIS, the philosophy is basically binary. You either handle criminal justice information or you don't. And the critical difference here is that merely viewing CJI on a screen constitutes access.
Wait, even if I don't download it?
It doesn't matter if absolutely nothing is saved, cached, or downloaded to the local hard drive.
Okay, going back to the water analogy. Under CJIS, if you even look at the glass of water through a window, you're suddenly in scope.
Yes. If your eyeballs can physically perceive the data, you are in scope.
But does that kind of transient viewing really trigger full compliance protocols? Like, if I'm just reading a police report on a remote screen, am I suddenly subjected to fingerprint background checks?
You are, absolutely. You are subject to CJIS personnel security requirements, and that includes mandatory fingerprint-based background checks.
That is wild.
And to make it even more complicated, the jurisdictional chaos makes this a nightmare for IT teams. CJIS compliance relies heavily on state-level agencies, which are known as CSAs, or CJIS systems agencies.
Right, because law enforcement is managed state by state.
Exactly. Because state laws differ, what passes an audit in one state might trigger a massive failure in another.
The sources mention Maryland as a prime example of this.
Yeah, Maryland's Department of Public Safety and Correctional Services has incredibly strict interpretations of physical viewing rules.
How strict are we talking?
Well, if an employee is viewing criminal justice data from their home in Maryland, the agency requires that specific home environment to be evaluated as a formal, controlled area.
Meaning the remote worker can't just be, like, sitting at the Starbucks.
Definitely not at a Starbucks.
Or even have their roommate walking behind them reading sensitive case files over their shoulder in their own apartment.
Exactly. The physical environment actually becomes part of the digital boundary. The interpretation of access is stretched to include the physical space around the monitor.
Which is a very different paradigm than the DoD simply tracking where a file is saved on a hard drive.
It really is.
Okay, so we know CMMC here is mostly about where the data physically lands, where the water goes. That implies there is a technical loophole organizations can exploit here, right?
How do you mean?
Well, if the goal is to keep the water off the laptop, couldn't a company just use a virtual desktop?
Yeah.
Like the data stays in the cloud, the laptop stays clean. Is that actually allowed by the DoD?
It is allowed, yes. And this brings us to the real power of Azure Virtual Desktop, or AVD, specifically when it's hosted in Azure Government.
Which is different from regular Azure.
Very different. Azure Government isn't just a different software license. It's a physically isolated, highly restricted set of data centers built by Microsoft exclusively for U.S. government agencies and their contractors.
Got it.
So when you run a virtual desktop inside that environment, you are leveraging a very specific regulatory carve-out. Under the final rule for CMMC, which is documented as 32 CFR Part 170.19, there is explicit language stating that a virtual desktop client is out of scope if it only allows keyboard, video, and mouse inputs.
And it blocks everything else.
Right. It has to completely block all CUI processing at the local endpoint.
Keyboard, video, and mouse. KVM. KVM, exactly.
So just to be clear about the mechanics here for you listening, when I type on my keyboard, I'm just sending tiny coordinate commands up to the cloud.
Just telemetry.
And the cloud is just sending a live video feed, literally just pictures of pixels, not back down to my monitor. The actual files, the spreadsheets, the defense schematics, they never leave the Azure data center.
The data never touches the physical endpoint. And what's fascinating here is how this shifts the paradigm. VDI isn't just an IT convenience anymore. It is a legally recognized, heavily fortified compliance shield.
But there's a catch, isn't there? Always a catch. Utilizing that shield requires administrators to aggressively burn all the bridges between the remote session and the local laptop.
Which takes us right back to our remote worker in the intro hitting Control-C. If those bridges are burned, that keystroke shouldn't do anything, right?
It absolutely shouldn't. Administrators must strictly disable clipboard redirection, meaning no copy and pasting between the secure cloud and the personal laptop.
Okay, no copy-paste. What else?
They have to block drive mapping. You cannot save a file from the virtual desktop down to your local C drive. They disable USB redirection, so you can't plug a thumb drive into your physical laptop and rip files out of the cloud environment.
Makes sense.
And local printing is entirely disabled.
It sounds incredibly restrictive for the user, I have to say. But it makes total sense for security.
Yeah.
And the sources also mention Microsoft is adding new features to AVD to stop people from bypassing these restrictions. Things like screen capture protection.
Yes, screen capture protection actively blocks snipping tools or screenshot shortcuts on the local operating system. If you try to take a screenshot, it just blacks out the screen in the capture.
Oh, nice.
But the more fascinating feature, I think, is session watermarking.
How does that work?
It superimposes a translucent QR code, or even the actual user's name, repeatedly across the entire remote desktop screen.
Wait, really? So if a frustrated worker decides to just pull out their smartphone and take a photograph of their monitor, their own name is baked into the photo.
Exactly. It changes the psychological behavior of an insider threat. You aren't just stealing data. You are generating cryptographic proof of your own guilt. The watermark deters the behavior before it even happens.
Okay, I love that. But I want to push back on this whole out-of-scope concept for a second.
Yeah, go ahead.
Put yourself in the shoes of a DoD assessor. You'll walk into a company and you see an employee using a completely unmanaged personal laptop. Maybe it's a laptop their teenager uses to download sketchy video games off the internet.
A classic scenario, honestly.
Right. And the employee logs into this highly secure Azure Virtual Desktop from that dirty machine. Isn't that a massive vulnerability? Like, what if there is keylogger malware running in the background of that personal laptop?
That's the million-dollar question.
Because it's recording every single keyboard, video, and mouse input, including the password to the secure enclave itself.
Yeah.
Calling that dirty laptop out of scope feels like a disaster waiting to happen.
Assessors absolutely recognize that risk. And for a long time, there was a fierce debate in the compliance world over whether an endpoint connecting to a virtual desktop could truly be considered completely out of scope.
I can imagine.
The reality of keyloggers and screen-scraping malware on unmanaged devices forced a compromise in the architecture. And this is where that second DoD asset category comes into play, the Security Protection Asset, or SPA.
Okay, so instead of pretending the laptop doesn't matter, they pull it slightly into the boundary.
Exactly. Rather than forcing the laptop to be a fully managed CUI asset, which, remember, would require those 110 NIST security controls and bankrupt the company.
Right.
They classify it as SPA. It provides a security function, so it is lightly managed. Organizations will use a tool like Microsoft Intune to run compliance-only checks.
What does a compliance-only check actually look like?
Basically, Intune sits on the laptop and acts as a health inspector. It asks, is the operating system fully updated? Is the firewall turned on? Is the antivirus active and clean?
And if the laptop fails that health check, let's say the teenager downloaded malware.
Then the gateway simply refuses the connection. Entra ID, which handles the identity and access management, uses a conditional access policy to block the laptop from reaching the virtual desktop entirely.
Okay, that's smart.
It acknowledges that the endpoint plays a role in security, without pulling it so deep into the boundary that it requires military-grade encryption on its local hard drive.
That makes the virtual desktop sound like the perfect impenetrable walled garden. But, VDI can be expensive, and it requires a lot of back-end engineering to set up. I know plenty of businesses that just want to issue a VPN, virtual private network, to their remote workers and just call it a day.
Oh, VPNs.
Yeah. The sources, however, call VPNs a massive compliance trap.
Yeah.
Why does the DoD hate VPNs so much?
Because a virtual private network functions fundamentally differently than a virtual desktop. A virtual desktop keeps the actual network distant and isolated, right? But a VPN extends the network boundary directly into your living room.
Into the laptop itself.
Yes. When you turn on a VPN, your physical laptop is assigned an IP address on the secure network, and it begins processing network traffic at the IP layer.
So it's actively downloading packets of data. Your web browser is caching images. Your system is creating temporary files. Your downloads folder is active.
Exactly. You have brought the controlled unclassified information directly to the endpoint. Under CMMC, that laptop is now undeniably a CUI asset. It must be subjected to every single security control.
Oh, wow. And under CJIS?
Under CJIS, you are now storing criminal justice data locally, which triggers an avalanche of encryption and auditing requirements.
So going back to our analogies, a VPN is like building a pipe directly into the secure vault.
Yeah.
Water is absolutely going to pool on your living room floor.
Yeah. Yes. 100%.
And a virtual desktop is like looking at the vault through a thick one-way mirror.
That's exactly it.
But the sources do mention an alternative to VPNs and VDIs. There is a third-party software called VEN, which creates what they call a blue border.
Right, VEN.
It's a software-defined secure enclave on your local PC. So it isolates your work applications from your personal applications, literally drawing a blue line around the secure windows.
It's a very cool concept, technically.
It sounds cool. But to me, that sounds like drawing a blue chalk circle on your living room floor and telling the government, trust me, nothing crosses this line. Why wouldn't an assessor accept a software boundary like that?
Because of the underlying assessment risk and the burden of proving to an auditor that the software cannot be bypassed. VEN is a sophisticated piece of logical isolation technology, but it faces an uphill battle in the compliance world.
What's the biggest hurdle?
The first major hurdle is FedRAMP authorization. FedRAMP is the federal government's gold standard for cloud security. It requires rigorous, exhaustive, independent testing of a cloud service's security architecture.
And Ven doesn't have that authorization yet, right?
It does not. And under CMMC rules, if a cloud service is managing any part of your security boundary and Ven's management plane operates from the cloud, it generally needs to meet FedRAMP moderate or high standards.
Which makes sense.
Furthermore, the independent auditors who conduct CMMC assessments, known as C3PAOs, are fundamentally skeptical of software-only boundaries operating on top of unmanaged hardware.
Because if the underlying operating system is compromised, the software running on top of it is probably compromised too.
Exactly. With a virtual desktop, the boundary is enforced by physical hardware and network switches deep inside a Microsoft Azure data center. With Ven, the boundary is enforced by software running on a user's personal, potentially dirty hardware. So most auditors look at that blue chalk circle and conclude that the underlying operating system could, theoretically, breach the enclave. Therefore, they demand to audit the entire laptop as a CUI asset.
Which puts you right back to square one.
Yeah.
Okay, so building the architecture is one thing, but surviving the assessor who actually knocks on your door is clearly another.
It is the hardest part.
That brings us to a really crucial concept in the sources, the shared responsibility model. Because I think a lot of people assume that if they just swipe a credit card and buy Microsoft GCC-High, they are instantly compliant.
That is a very common and very dangerous misconception. Buying the platform only gets you halfway there.
How does the model break down?
The shared responsibility model breaks down into 3 categories: inherited controls, shared controls, and customer-owned controls. When an organization buys into Microsoft's government cloud, they inherit Microsoft's physical security.
So, data center security.
Right. Microsoft's data centers are heavily guarded, their servers are physically locked in cages, and their personnel are vetted federal citizens.
So it's like renting a room in a fortress. Microsoft built the fortress, they guard the perimeter, but they hand you the keys to your specific room. If you leave your door wide open, the fortress doesn't matter.
That is a perfect analogy.
Yeah.
And assessors are incredibly strict about how you prove that your door is locked.
So what kind of proof do they want? A signed policy document.
Oh, no. They will not accept a written company policy that just says, we promise we disable the clipboard and block USB drives. They demand technical cryptographic evidence.
Give me some examples.
They want to see the actual Entra ID conditional access log exports. They want the Intune device compliance profiles. They require a system security plan, the SSP, that reads like a highly detailed technical blueprint proving that the controls are technically enforced, not just administratively declared.
And this burden of proof is getting heavier, isn't it? I mean, looking at the sources, they detail the CJIS 6.0 modernization policy, which the FBI released in December 2024.
Yes, CGIS 6.0 is a massive shift.
It looks like a massive shift towards zero trust architecture. Let's break down what zero trust actually means for the user sitting at home.
Well, zero trust operates on the assumption that the network is already hostile. It demands continuous verification. You never trust a connection, regardless of where it originates.
Even if it's from a recognized device.
Even then. And one of the most significant changes in CJIS 6.0 is the complete elimination of simple text message authentication for privileged access. Those 6-digit codes you get via SMS, they are dead.
Because they're incredibly vulnerable, right, to SIM swapping attacks.
Exactly. A hacker can trick your phone provider into routing your text messages to their device. Under the new CJIS requirements, agencies must use phishing-resistant multi-factor authentication.
Phishing-resistant MFA.
Right. And the standard now is IVOTO2 Fast Identity Online. This typically means issuing physical hardware security keys.
Oh, wow. So a remote worker actually has to plug a physical USB token into their laptop and physically tap it with their finger to cryptographically prove they are present and authorized.
Yes, the physical presence requirement is key. You can't be tricked into giving away a code over the phone because the physical key has to interact with the device.
That's intense.
It is. And speaking of the physical environment, CJIS 6.0 heavily reinforces those controlled area rules we discussed earlier.
The Maryland rules.
Exactly. Even with a perfect virtual desktop architecture and a FIDO2 hardware key, if a remote worker prints a sensitive document over their home Wi-Fi network to a wireless printer in the hallway, they have breached the boundary.
Wait, really? Just printing wirelessly?
Yes, the wireless transmission of criminal justice information over an unencrypted home network is strictly forbidden.
Because anyone sitting outside in a car with a packet sniffer could intercept that print job.
Exactly. It all comes back to persistence.
Hmm.
An auditor doesn't just want a snapshot showing your system was secure on a random Tuesday in October.
They want the whole movie.
They want historical proof. They expect organizations to use some tools, security information, and event management platforms like Microsoft's Sentinel.
What does Sentinel do exactly?
It ingests millions of logs from every device and cloud service in the environment. An auditor will ask to see Sentinel logs proving that your conditional access policies successfully blocked unauthorized devices over the last 12 months. They want data proving the boundary holds up 24 hours a day, 7 days a week.
Wow. Okay, so if I had to synthesize the practical takeaway from all of this for you listening, the technology to secure remote work definitely exists, but you cannot simply buy compliance off the shelf.
Not at all.
GCC-High and Azure Government give you the raw materials, but your IT team still has to be the architect, the builder, and the security guard enforcing those boundaries every single day.
The platform provides an incredibly secure foundation, but the organization must configure and operate it compliantly.
All right, let's do a quick recap of the deep dive today. We started by looking at the fundamental philosophies of data protection, how the DoD tracks the physical flow of data like water, while the FBI tracks the mere visual access to it.
The glass of water.
Exactly. We explored the magic of Azure Virtual Desktops and how ruthlessly burning the bridges, disabling the clipboard, cutting off USB drives, and applying screen watermarks can legally keep your personal endpoint out of the compliance nightmare.
Right.
We looked at why VPNs are a trap that pull data directly onto your hard drive and why auditors are still highly skeptical of software-only borders like Venn. And finally, we unpacked the heavy burden of proof required in the shared responsibility model, especially with the strict new FIDO2 authentication rules in CJIS 6.0.
You know, if we connect this to the bigger picture, there is one final forward-looking concept buried in the CJIS 6.0 mandate that I think is really worth considering.
What?
The framework is pushing heavily toward continuous monitoring using automated AI-based security tools with full enforcement slated for October 2027.
Bringing artificial intelligence directly into boundary enforcement.
Think about the implications of that for a moment. If artificial intelligence is constantly ingesting telemetry, evaluating a user's behavioral patterns, analyzing their keystroke dynamics, monitoring how quickly they move their mouse, and assessing their session data in real time, the traditional concept of an accreditation boundary might fundamentally change.
So instead of trying to draw a digital fence around a physical piece of plastic and metal sitting on a kitchen table.
The user's identity and their behavioral patterns become the only boundary that matters.
Wow.
If an AI detects that the telemetry of a session suddenly deviates from a user's historical baseline, maybe they are typing differently or trying to access files they usually ignore, the system severs the connection instantly.
Well, that's incredible.
It wouldn't matter what physical device they are using or what network they are connected to. The rigid, static borders we spend hundreds of hours engineering today might dissolve entirely into real-time behavioral algorithms tomorrow.
That is wild to think about. Your actual behavior becomes the firewall.
Exactly.
Well, until that AI-driven future arrives, we still have to worry about the very real compliance audits of the present. So next time you are sitting in your living room drinking coffee and you go to hit Control-C on a remote desktop, just remember the invisible boundary you are standing on and exactly what it costs if you cross it. Thanks for joining us on this deep dive, and keep questioning the world around you.